Welcome back. We're talking today with Dr. Fred Lessing about his experience hiding from the Nazi SS in World War II in his native Netherlands. So Fred, we were talking just before the break about your hiding away and disobeying your mother by taking along some special item.
Yes. She said, don't take anything with you and put on your jacket. I put on my jacket, and then as I walked down the hall to the front door, I picked up my teddy bear. It's a little teddy bear, and that became my only possession and really my only connection with my family as I stayed with all these different families.
You carry a bear with you.
Yes. I used to, for many years as I spoke to students, I used my little bear, even though he's kind of fragile. But then I was contacted by Yad Vashem if they were staging a exhibit called No Child's Play, which was all about Holocaust children's games and toys. And somehow she'd found out that I had this little bear that I brought to every conference I went, anything to do with the Holocaust, I took my little bear. And it was really hard parting with him. But finally I decided, well, it's only for 9 months exhibit. It's probably important, so okay. And I called her back and I said, well, I had a talk with Bear and we decided that he should go. And so he did. And so he was part of this exhibit where he was in a little glass house of his own and some text next to him. And he became kind of famous there in various ways, but the curator ended up writing a story about him called the Mona Lisa of Yad Vashem, meaning that he was a precious object.
And I think it's really important to get that side of the story of the war and the Holocaust, is that they were, countless small children involved and ultimately exterminated.
Yes, many. After the war in Delft, I have a picture of four boys who survived, 4 Jewish boys. There might have been 5, one that wasn't in the picture. I'm one and my brother is one, standing there. I don't know how many there were before then. But once I had once my bear was in Israel, oh, and by the way, at the end of the 9 months, they said, we're going to extend the exhibit for a year. I said, oh, okay.
You didn't tell me.
And then they extended it again. Mm-hmm. And now he's been there something like 18 years. And a lot of accounts say that I gave it to Yad Vashem, but I didn't. It's
still
on loan.
Okay. So can you share with us
yes.
the bear that you take?
Well, what happened is that my brother Ed, who's also a speaker, sent me this, what he called the stand-in bear. He said, you got to have a bear when you talk to the students.
Truly.
So this guy, I've become fond of this stand-in bear.
And he's roughly the same size?
He's a little bigger.
Oh, okay.
Mine is, I'd say, a little bit smaller. And he's got all his fuzz. My bear is all...
Like the Velveteen
like
Rabbit is all
he really looks like a war victim.
Loved off. Yeah. Yeah.
Among other things, his head got bitten off by a dog.
At one of the houses you were staying at?
I think so. And his stuffing, which was mostly wood shavings, started to fall out all over the place. So my father fixed him with there was a gadget, a wartime gadget with which you could fix leaks in cooking pans. If there was a leak, you drilled a little bigger hole, and then this thing was a screw, 2 washers, one metal and the other one some material, and you screwed.
But this is just to seal off the neck of the headless bear.
Yes, after that he had this metal plate across the top of his head.
And can you love a headless bear?
Made no difference to me at all.
Okay.
But when I got pneumonia at one of the places I was staying with, no, not pneumonia, diphtheria, early probably still in 42, my mother had a way of coming to see me whenever I was ill or threatened in some way. It was amazing.
Which gave you the sense that maybe she was just always watching down the street where she had left you.
She must have been. I don't know. She would come to visit me there. This is in Tilburg, in the southern part of Holland, very Catholic there. And she said, when I came into your street, I knew you weren't there because you were always playing outside with the other kids. Well, I had pneumonia that time, but when I had diphtheria earlier, I woke up in these people's home. I was sleeping upstairs, and there was a huge closet with a giant mirror, and all these, I had a lot of fever, and all these horrible faces were coming at me, and I was really scared, and I got out of bed and ran down the stairs screaming, and at the bottom of the stairs, my mother. She catches me in her arms, takes me back upstairs, spends some time with me, and then she has to go, and she says, is there anything you want? And I held up the Headless Bear and said, I want a new head for my bear. And when I woke up, she was gone, but the bear had a new head. Amazing. And well, I've shown you the pictures.
Which she had sewn from...
Yeah, apparently she and my father, I only recently rediscovered that she took it with her to her hiding place with my father. They were hiding together. And both of them worked. My father grew up his father was a tailor.
Okay.
So that whole family knew how to sew. And so they took a little, where the star had once been over the pocket, they took that pocket off my little suit and made a head for my bear. And that's the head he still has to this day. And one further thing about him, as I said, he's been there all this time. And recently, I got a letter from Yehudit, who's the curé, she's retired, saying that she'd gotten a letter from two different people. One, a writer of children's books in Israel, and the other, a publisher of children's book in Minneapolis, I think. Both of them were interested in that story. At first I said, no, absolutely not. I can't be part of that. There's this story. I said, there's something, and it's true for many Holocaust survivors, that the truth, the literal exact truth is really important. To not exaggerate or underplay. And that's true for me too. And I said, I'm the only one who can tell that story. And I wrote that to her in a letter. So I said, no, I can't do this. I can't have anything to do with that. I woke up the next morning thinking, wait a minute. I spoke yesterday as a survivor. Those are my feelings as a survivor. But I'm not only a survivor, I'm also a teacher. And I believe in Holocaust education. So why would I object to somebody writing a children's book about my story?
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote her that, and after that we really worked on the book together. She didn't want to put anything in it that didn't seem okay with me. And this little book that is lying on the table here is the result. It was published very recently, and it's really wonderful. It was so amazingly accurate to my feelings and to the whole thing. It just amazed me that, you know, I'm taking care of the bear and the bear is taking care of me. So it's a lovely book, but I'm waiting for an English translation.
Because right now it's only in Hebrew.
Yeah.
Sure.
I hope they're going to translate it.
Yeah.
It already won a prize in Israel, and it was also picked to represent Israel children's books at an Italian conference or something like that.
And you said recently some people recreated your bear for you.
Oh yes. Iris sent a letter, two letters. One was from a woman who sent me her story, and then she told me about this school and this class that had read this book, and they all wanted to make a new teddy bear for me. And so they had a contest, and then she sent me, or they sent me, the one that won the contest.
The winner.
And that's this little guy. And I think it's just, I wrote back and said, I know immediately what his name is. It's going to be Son of Bear, you know. Because they copied. He also is missing an ear.
Sure.
And I just thought it was so amazing. So now
And
I
the
have
different
these,
colored cloth for the head, so
yeah.
yeah, wonderful.
So this book is getting quite a bit of publicity in the newspapers, and so people write me now because I said don't use my real name in this book, but she snuck it in there somewhere.
Okay.
So they know it's me. So I'm getting some correspondence, and so the bear, especially the one in Israel, has become part and parcel of my story because I usually start off at the beginning when I speak. Very personal story for me, and I say it's not only very personal, it's a story of a very young child, and then I hold up my bear. And said I grew uncomfortable with that, and the only solution I could think of was to make it personal for you too. So then I spent some time talking about, what is this anyway? Why are you here? What is all this stuff about the Holocaust? And what is Holocaust education? And the bottom line of that is the difference between, I use this example, between a girl, very much like the one I just was talking about, who lives here, who saves a Jewish child during a raid. And she's not Jewish, but she's riding along on her bike and she scoops it up and this little girl survives. I don't think her family did. The difference between that girl and this girl over here who looks exactly the same, who's only too glad to turn her in because you get $6 for every Jew that you turn in to the Nazis. What is that? And does your education have anything to do with that difference? So I bring Bear in pretty early because it is just the story of a child.
It's that elemental, you can connect with people. Not
Yes.
you bring it out of the head
Yes.
and you bring it into the heart.
Especially the seventh graders, the younger ones, they ask me all kinds of, one kid wrote and said, "Where did you get that bear?" Sort of as though I stole it or something. And why didn't you ever give him a name? And I said, I don't know, it's just a little
But I want to
kid.
go back to the story with your mom giving you the repaired bear, the reheaded bear, because in her constant looking out for you, she was exposing herself to danger. And ultimately, can you talk about how she was captured?
Yeah. She did all the travel and contacting. All of it was dangerous. Any travel, she tried to travel mostly at night. I guess it was safer. In Tilburg, this is towards the last, 1944, maybe the beginning of 44, I don't know, somewhere in there. I was hidden in a boarding house in Tilburg. Little old lady ran three-story building with all the students and other people. There I came down with pneumonia. And again, that's when my mother showed up and said, I knew immediately something was wrong. You weren't playing in the street. She called a doctor. Years later, she laughed and said, you know, I had to find a good doctor. And she didn't mean medically good. She meant one that wouldn't betray me because he would have to examine me and see that I was circumcised. And, you know, in that part of the country, if you're circumcised,
You're Jewish.
Almost certainly Jewish. She found such a doctor. He said he has pneumonia. Wrap him in a blanket and meet me at the hospital. And that's what happened. I was in the hospital for 6 weeks. And she was caught at the railway station by a Dutch policeman. But most of them were just as bad. They actually looked like Nazis, except they were in black. And so she followed that route that all Jews did in Holland did, to Amsterdam prison. And from there, they were shipped mostly to Auschwitz, Mauthausen, Sobibor. But not my mother. Because from the moment she was arrested, she claimed that she was an American citizen, which of course she wasn't, and she couldn't prove that. But she did speak English, and she had, with my father and Ed, in 1929, tried to immigrate to the United States. They lived in Boston.
Bad year to come to the U.S.
That's what happened. After a couple of years, they couldn't make it, and they went back to Holland just in time for the Holocaust. But as I said, she spoke English, and she could remember the name of the neighbors and the grocery store across the street and the number of the bus and so on. And apparently they believed her, because that's why she was not sent to Auschwitz. Bergen-Belsen was not a death camp. It was actually a plan by Himmler to accumulate what they called foreign nationals, Jews from, I don't know, weird places like Curacao and other, and if the idea was that eventually there would be thousands of them and they would exchange them for German prisoners. And that never really materialized. There were only 2 exchanges, and my mother was one of them, because apparently they believed that she was an American citizen.
But again, because of her resourcefulness, her pluck,
Incredible.
she got herself out of that.
The guts she had.
Potentially
Just, oh, and in
horrible
the train, the cop that was accompanying her to Amsterdam fell asleep, and she took out my hospital card and ripped it in little pieces and ate it, so that they wouldn't have any.
Wouldn't be able to track you down.
Her story is full of stuff like that, you know. It's just amazing. She was in many ways just an ordinary mother and housewife, but now I realize there couldn't be two.
She had amazing presence of mind the whole time, because she knew any slip, and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. So I want to go, at one point you and your dad and your brothers were all united and were hiding out in a small cottage.
Yes. What happened was that very shortly before she was arrested, she rented this little cottage in the country in Gelderland, Voorthuizen, for 2 weeks, because she wanted us to have a chance to be all together, all of us, because she thought the war would go on forever, and sooner or later we would all be caught. And of course she never made it to the cabin, but I did. A distant half-sister of my father came and got me and took me on the train into the country. I had never been in the country or never hidden in the country. And I loved those beautiful trees and cows, and it just sounds so wonderful out there. And we walked on a dirt road for about 40 minutes and came to a sort of manor house. And a little further down was this tiny little cottage, just a little summer cottage with no amenities whatever. And when I went in there was my brother, both brothers, and my father. It was another one of these amazing things, you know, created by my mother. And we didn't just stay for 2 weeks, we stayed for a whole year. I think my father got in touch with the underground, who threatened the landlord. The landlord, the first day we were there, asked my father, "Would you like to go for a walk?" And he said, "Oh, sure." During which he said, "You know, I think the Germans are almost as bad as the Jews." So
well,
this was
happily
great.
tipping his hand that he was not to be trusted.
But we did, and we pretty well wrecked that little cottage. When it got to be winter, we cut a hole in the side for a stovepipe. And that year would take a book. So much happened, and it's all so clear in my memory. The important thing is that the worst was over for me. I was back with my family. I was not all alone, carrying this terrible secret. And the other 2 things that are worth saying is during that whole year there were 2 things going on. One was survival. I often call it the ultimate male bonding survival encounter. Every day was scrabbling for food, for fuel, and avoiding German patrols.
Sure. So we're going to take a short break and come back, but we'll hold that thought. And for folks watching, we'll be back in just a moment to continue our conversation with Dr. Fred Lessing.